This episode is brought to you by Oracle. AI may be important, but it needs a lot of processing speed, and that gets expensive fast. Upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is the single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. Do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic. Take a free test drive at oracle.com/enhance.
Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker Geist, and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process, and for authors to learn valuable tips on producing and marketing your audiobooks. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Hello, and thank you so much for joining me. We're going to take a look at footnotes and similar citations and how to deal with them. So let's jump in. Always, as the guiding principle, we want to be thinking about what is going to create the best user experience, the best listening experience for your customers. In order to be able to really properly craft an audiobook to create that best listening experience, you need to know who your listeners are. Now, I'm not talking about specifically it's this particular person or that one, but really, who is your target audience? And let me give an example of why that makes a difference in the context of footnotes. For example, I narrated an audiobook some years ago, which was a very academic book, and it had hieroglyphics in it, and it was very complicated. The title was Tourism and Travel in Ancient Egypt, Travel Like an Egyptian by Mohammed Yahya Zed Ahmed. And this book had many bibliographical references in it, as well as footnotes. This project was written in a very academic style, and it suggested to me, and then I confirmed with the author, that in fact he was appealing to a more academic audience. But he also was wanting to appeal to the general audience, people who just might have an interest in this topic. So here we were trying to really balance two different audience segments in determining how we would handle the many citations that happened both within the flow of the text as well as footnotes that happened separately. You may be asking, well, why does it really matter? Here's why it matters. If you believe that your audience is more academic and is more likely to want to know what those references are that you are citing, or text that you are quoting from, more information about that. There are a few different ways to handle this. And they don't have to be either or. Many times we want to take advantage of doing more than one thing to be able to best create an experience that will create that best listening experience. Okay, with the footnotes, we want to first look at, does it provide some content that is annotating the text rather than just a bibliographical citation? Is there some additional information that will provide either like context or background information or something that will be important to the listener to know as they're taking it in? Obviously, it's important enough that the author has decided to put it into a footnote, but has not felt that it is so important that it's worth interrupting the flow of text or taking the reader down a kind of side path and out of that flow. These are the same questions that we want to be asking ourselves about what will that listener's journey be in this narrative as we think about whether the content included in the footnote is important to be included? And if it is, what is the best location for that? Now, in a textbook, you're going to have the footnote immediately in the exact place that it's referencing. But for an audiobook, it might be a better placement, not necessarily, but it might be a better placement if the context is clear or can be reiterated or recreated in the context of delivering the footnote. It may be better at the end of a chapter, or even better, maybe, at the end of the subsection, that the subheading, at the end of that section, where you may want to then provide the more citation-like information or annotation-like information that is going to reference just the segment of text you just completed. Now, let's say, for example, you've got a long chapter and you have many footnotes, and they're ones that you want to include within that flow somewhere. It might even be better to place footnotes at the end of a paragraph, for example. Each book is going to have its own best way. And again, what we're trying to craft is the ideal narrative flow. So our listeners don't get lost. They don't get lost down the rabbit hole or down some side path, but they are provided with that deeper information that is coloring the listening experience, right? So we want to look at several things. We want to look at how many are there? How many footnotes are in this particular chapter or section? If there are very few, then adding footnote content is actually pretty easy because you can briefly interrupt the flow. You can finish the sentence, and right where that footnote is, you can say footnote or note, and then you deliver that content, and then you do end footnote or end note. And the reason that we frame it is because we want to make sure that our listeners understand, we don't lose them. It can be very confusing if you just throw it in there. Maybe you alter your voice just a little bit or something. They can get really confused about what it is that they're hearing, and we never want our listeners to be confused, right? We want to keep them with us, keep them engaged. Okay. Another way, let's say that there are many footnotes or annotations, and we have short chapters. Another potential way to handle this would be to have the main narrative in one voice and to have the footnotes in a different voice. That way we are avoiding this need to say footnote or note or end note. We can bypass that because we're still creating clarity. We would want to preface the audiobook, put a note in the beginning to explain what they're hearing. So it might be something along the lines of, there will be footnotes along the way, and those will be delivered by the name of the narrator, something like that. Whatever that is, an appropriate statement. The point being simply that we want to let our listeners know up front what the experience will be if we're doing something like a two-voice main narrative and annotations approach. Even with that approach, if it makes sense or could make sense for the footnotes or annotations to go at the end of the section or chapter, that's going to be preferable. It may involve adding in some text into the footnote to provide the clarity, the context that we had if we were reading the book from a text version, and we could see where that number was, and then our eyes can drop down to the bottom of the page. We would need instead, from an audio perspective, to be able to get to the end of that section and listen to the footnotes. Well, maybe it references a specific person, and the footnote has their birth and death dates. Well, we would certainly need to name that person in the footnote annotation so that our listeners would know who the heck we're talking about. That's like a kind of an obvious example, but the same can be true for any footnote. You might need to provide just a little bit of context. What you're doing then is you are delivering that annotation content in a way that is going to work well for an audiobook. Here at Pro Audio Voices, we love working with authors who have a big goal in mind. They really want to reach out to their audience around the world. We're here to help make that happen. It starts with our pre-production process, where we're evaluating and determining what elements of the audiobook we can leverage to both create an excellent listener experience for your listeners, as well as drawing them to your website to engage with you further. It continues on through the production process, making decisions that will enhance and support your big goals, as well as creating a great listener experience. But we don't stop there. Once the audiobook is live, we move on to helping you market your audiobook with the Audiobook Marketing Program. Come check us out at proaudiovoices.com. To schedule a call to talk about your audiobook project, click on Get Started. Okay, so let's now talk about some of the other kinds of audiences. I mostly focused on what we would want to provide for a more academic audience. I want to add one other thing that I haven't covered yet for that kind of an audience, and that is about providing the information not only in the audiobook, but also make it available on your website. For the academic listener who would like to have access to that information, it'll be much easier for them actually to just go to your website. You'll want to let them know at the front end that you're providing that information for free on your website. You'll want to announce that both in the beginning and also at the end of the audiobook as a reminder for them that they can go and access that information on your website. And just total side note here, but if you have visuals, charts, other things like that are also going to be, that are in the book, and you really should make those available as well on your website, you can make that all as a part of the same announcement. That is typically best done at the end of the About the Author section. Okay. Let's talk about a different kind of audience. Let's talk about your general audience that is not really likely to want to go follow up on references, go check out who actually was touting that theory, whatever that is. Okay? Let's talk about this more general audience. And in the example of the Tourism and Travel in Ancient Egypt book, this was the audience that they're less likely, like I said, to go check out the references. And what we don't want to do is create obstacles, steps, stones along the pathway, if you will, that they have to step over in order to continue down the path. Because if you have too many obstacles, they're just going to turn around and say, you know what? Not worth the effort. I'm tired of having to listen to all those names or all those titles, whatever your content, your citations are referencing. Now, most often, in terms of bibliographical references, we'll skip the actual reference and just leave that to the website to handle and put a note in there. Coming back to the academic audience, they may want a more sort of generalized bibliographical reference. The content that I was talking about, we would more likely include is less the bibliographical than it is the content that is going to provide some annotated content or text beyond just a citation. And yet they may want to have some idea, some inclusion. And we did that with the Ancient Egypt book, but we put it at the end of each section, and we grouped together the authors that we were referencing, and it gave just enough reference to those authors to where the author felt that was important for his audience, and yet it wasn't providing these little rocks or pebbles along the path. Okay, coming back to the general audience, most of the time they're just going to want to skip any kind of annotations. But again, you're going to have to evaluate how important is that side text. You may want to include some, but not all, and that's okay. You don't have to make a solid, consistent rule that's going to go, throughout the book. Okay, we're doing one footnote, then we have to do them all. We don't have to do that. Again, we are always trying to craft what's going to be the best listening experience. It might be that half the footnotes are really going to get in the way of everybody listening. And another half might be providing a level of content that would be really interesting to people. Footnotes can be fascinating. And the only issue here is making sure that we're not confusing or sidetracking our listeners. They always need to know where we are going and what we're doing. And I think it's safe to say that if we are providing that level of guidance and clarity, that our audience will stay with us. So I think I'll just wrap it up here with, if you are trying to figure out what to do with the footnotes or annotations in a project that you're working on, and you'd like some guidance, we would be happy to talk with you and help you sort that out. That is a part of pre-production that we highly value and really, I won't say specialize in because we do a whole lot more overall, but it is an area of the audiobook production process that we have great expertise in at Pro Audio Voices. Best way to reach us is go to proaudiovoices.com, go to the contact, or just book a call. Most pages will make it easy to do. We love talking with authors and publishers and others in our industry to help provide some guidance and education around all these kinds of complicated questions in the audiobook world. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you have an awesome day. Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.